It is the top of the hour, so we are going to get started. Welcome to the Global Math Department. My name is Lee Natero, and I'll be your host tonight. Tonight, we're going to be hearing from Scott Miller and David Sladsky about Talk Less, Discuss More, Crafting and Implementing Open-Ended Questions. Before I introduce the speakers, I would ask people to introduce themselves in the chat window, telling us what you teach, where you teach, and what your Twitter handle is, if you have one. And our speakers do have Twitter handles on their screen, and I'm sure if you follow them, they may even follow you back.
Mm-hmm. Love connecting.
Mm-hmm. So what you teach, where you teach, and what your Twitter handle is, if you have one. All right, so let me explain a little bit about how these meetings work. These meetings are recorded and are available within 24 hours after the meeting ends. To view the recording, you would use the same URL you used to get here tonight. Although this year we are going to also be posting our recordings to the Global Math Department YouTube channel, so you can also catch the videos there as well. The Global Math Community prides itself on being friendly and supportive. The chat room is available for topical and general conversation throughout the meeting. I'll catch your questions for the presenters, so don't worry that the presenters won't notice your questions in the chatter. So tonight we have two speakers. One of our speakers is Scott Miller. Scott Miller is currently the Math Department Chair at Naperville Central High School, where he teaches and collaborates with 26 amazing teachers. Those were his words. He is a Desmos certified trainer and loves working with students and teachers to integrate mathematical thinking and technology. His Twitter handle is at smiller229. And also tonight with us, we have David Sladsky. David has been teaching high school math for 33 years. He currently teaches Algebra 1 and Geometry at Naperville Central High School. David has a passion for movement in the classroom and wrote the book Energizing Brain Breaks. He also blogs at teachinghighschoolmath.blogspot.com, and his Twitter handle is at @dsladky. So welcome to Scott and David.
Thanks, Lee. We really appreciate this opportunity to talk with you and learn with you and share on this topic that's been something that's been we've been working on over many years and learning and changing what we do in the classroom. So we're glad to join you. So I think we'll go ahead and get started, Dave.
Yep. So I'm, as Lee said, I'm math teacher at Naperville Central and married with 3 grown children. And you can see my 2 little grandsons there, Jack and Max there. And then some of my hobbies, I love to bike, and I just picked up unicycling in June. So that's been kind of a journey. So yeah. Scott?
I am married with 3 grown children, all in grad school and college, and I've gotten back into running and walking and biking with having some more time at home, which has been great. And together, Dave and I have actually been teaching close to 60 years combined, not 60 years apiece, but 60 years combined. And this coming year, I'll be teaching geometry and working in math support. And Dave will be teaching Algebra 1 and geometry and Algebra 1 support. So we're glad to join you. And the reason that we bring that up in terms of close to 60 years of experience, we're all facing a new year like we've never had before. So we want to talk to you in terms of what we're going to be doing today is to empower you to create open-ended questions that you can use in a synchronous, in-person, a blended format, or in an online format in synchronous or asynchronous format to work with. And we'll do that if looking at in terms of our instructional practice and practice that students are doing, and also an assessment.
Yeah, and we're doing it in a digital mode too. We're not just thinking of the classroom itself. We're thinking of how we do this as a digital presentation. Yep.
So to get that started, we just want to use this similar to how we would use in say a Zoom setting from a digital format, is in the chat window, we want you to actually answer a question for us, starting off with a little bit of math.
Yeah, maybe get a pencil.
Mm-hmm. So what we'd like to do is find the coordinates of 2 points that produce a slope of -2/7. So if you could just enter your 2 ordered pairs into the chat, that would be fantastic. While people are doing that, I do want to say, yeah, Dave, congratulations on being awarded a 2020 Presidential Award for Excellence in Teaching Mathematics. So I want to congratulate you for the state of Illinois.
Thank you, Scott. And I know Darshan said that. Thank you, Darshan. And actually, I think Darshan is, I don't remember which year you were awarded that, but congratulations to you, Darshan.
Great. Okay.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah, so we got some examples that we're looking at here. Fantastic as we see those coming along. So what we wanted to show is we're seeing those are these the order pairs that you came up with? And what we see is none of these match with what we see on here, which is fantastic to work with. But this lends itself into what we're going to be talking about today of talking less as a teacher, listening more to our students and getting our students engaged in discussion. And so really we're talking about going from a teacher-centered classroom to a student-centered classroom. And so the way to do that then, we find that's been super helpful to do that is to work with open-ended questions. So quote here, it's helped Dave and I sort of think about some of the things that we've been doing in the classroom from Danielle Willingham here, is that, yes, people are naturally curious, our students are naturally curious, and so are we, but not naturally good thinkers unless we set the cognitive conditions that are right. We will avoid thinking if the cognitive conditions aren't right. So we found that open-ended questions help us direct that and setting those cognitive conditions to do that.
Absolutely.
So we will show examples then of before and after, sort of the question that we have that we're looking at that we start with, and how do we restructure that to make it an open-ended question. Again, still within the same framework of the concept that we're learning, but using it from a different direction. Just kind of reminds us, Dave and I, of our beginning years of teaching with chalk and chalkboards, and now moving to a digital environment. So that's
Scott, that's you, right? A snowboarder in the tube?
No, that's actually just an animation I created using Desmos for there. I have not started that. I don't know if I'll ever get into snowboarding, but it seems like something to be interesting to do. So, All right.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is typically what we do with this kind of question. We usually just have something that gives one answer, and they work it out, figure out, and get our same answer that we got. But here's the thing: is we create this kind of engagement by having them think on their own of their own answer and how they might work that through, instead of relying on us to show how we would do it, and then appreciate their classmates when they present as well. So this is before.
And then this is the after, which is the question that we started with here. So again, you can see in terms of moving from a direction of a closed-ended question to now an open-ended question where we can recognize the current conceptual understanding of our students, and then recognize their brilliance that they have and where they're at, where we can't do that with a procedural question. So we'll look at it. Is it better here or two? So let me see that. I'll try that again. So is it better here or here? So just those that remind us of what it's like being at the optometrist, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean that Dave and I never use closed-ended questions. I don't want to give that sort of vibe or thought process or something else like that. But it's this journey that we've used of how do we slow things down and listen to what our students are saying, develop better relationships with them. And we found that open-ended questions are a way to do that, and then also see where students are at.
And often we put some parameters on it. And this one, you can see right here, we just have your coordinates can't be on an axis, or just some other parameter that will guide them a little bit more towards what we're looking for and not be so restrictive.
Yeah, and then also work to some extensions that way. So again, because in the chat we saw quite a few there, the ordered pairs were on an axis. But again, we can use this question in many different contexts in different ways. So one other way we want to use the chat here, similar to what we would use in a classroom, is asking this thought process here. As a teacher, you can divide your class time that you have in 100% into two categories, where the teacher's talking or instructing, or the teacher's listening and providing feedback. So what do you think your ideal feedback or ideal breakdown would be? Just put your two percentages with a comma in between them.
Yeah.
You could do that in the chat.
Maybe even what your thought process on that is. And obviously there's no answer, no correct answer, just some of our thoughts and it could be what you're going towards, or it could be, what you actually are now. This is a common theme. Yeah. 2080.
2080. Yep.
What did you say the other day, Scott?
I found mine. It was sort of 1585 was the direction I was sort of moving towards, it just but finding that the structure of some of the examples we're going to look at here really help in terms of moving that towards where it becomes a more student-focused classroom, a better position for me to listen and relate to my students and provide feedback to them as a result.
Yeah, and I think I said a third, so a third, 2/3, and I see a couple people are at that too. And boy, certainly is a thing to think about. And I think this question might be good for you and your colleagues to discuss. Just where should we be heading and why? Yeah.
So in terms of just looking at what some of the data shows, so Danes did some research on actually history teachers and looking at the questions that they posed in their classrooms, and came up with 93% of the questions were of low order thinking, were recall questions, were ones where the students are just sort of regurgitating the information. So not the cognitive condition where thinking was taking place. So again, that colleague of ours down at the University of Illinois is really asking, who is doing the thinking in the problem? We as math teachers, you might say, well, Scott and Dave, you just said something about history teachers. We're not immune as math teachers. Looking at here, this is a breakdown of what two researchers did on this. This was Stigler and Hebert. They actually looked at the third international mathematics and science study of the redoing this back in 1999. And what they found is they looked at the types of questions that teachers are asking in different countries. So they're looking at 100 different teachers from each country, looking at their typical math classroom, and they started recording the types of questions that were being posed. And two questions that came out, two categories were using procedures and making connections. But what you're seeing here is when teachers took making connection questions, of whether they kept them as making connection questions, or did they convert it into using procedures. And what you'll see here is that in the United States, the examples that they saw is 59% of those questions were turned into procedural questions, and none of them were kept as making connections. And so it's not something that we as math teachers are immune to. It's an easy thing to fall into. And in fact, the researchers had to sort of create a new category for United States students called the teacher giving the answer. So the students would outweight the teacher and would give what the answer to the question is. So what we found then is one way to combat this, because it's quicker. It feels like it's more efficient to do that, to work that way. But we're going to give some examples of how to try and stem that tide and try and not move in that direction.
Well, and it's easier if there's not just one answer too.
Correct. That's exactly right. So how we change our practice, it's not been something that we've done perfect. It's not something that we changed, automatically right away with everything we did. It's something that we've grown and worked and, changed different ideas and come up with new ways and fluid successes and fluid. And we've had successes and failures in the classroom. So we want to share what some of those are. So changing direction on questions, Dave.
This is allowed, actually, right?
Yeah.
Usually it says that's not allowed. Can't U-turn, but we can, and we can change the way we teach and think. And I think it's always changing, and certainly it's going to change this fall.
Mm-hmm. So part of this then, in terms of what to share with you in this presentation then, is the process of saying that we're going to be starting a school year where we're in remote learning or an e-learning or online environment for at least 6 weeks or much longer. And in that realm, we wanted to say that things that we do in person, we also then carry over into the online environment, and giving you some tools and some examples to do that. So even if we're in a hybrid situation where our students are going to be physically distant from each other, so the way that we usually interact with students and they interact with each other is going to be different. So we want to make sure that we're actually finding ways and things that we did in the spring were actually the same, just we had to find different ways to do it. So this is one that's a before, one that's on graphing quadratic equations, one where, we're looking at the procedure where students are at, and then here's the after. And what you can see here then is that we've changed the structure up to an open-ended, and so we can actually recognize where our students' current conception is at, recognize what they're, what students know, and look at. And an open-ended question invites us into that, and it slows us down to look at student work, to look at where each student is at, to recognize where directions are feedback that we can provide for them. And we can't do that as easily sometimes in a closed-ended question.
Well, and this is a low floor, high ceiling question too, because some students would not, maybe would jump to a particular way, a vertex form or something like that, and some might maybe even use guess and check in a graphing calculator or Desmos. And it's just, I think this empowers a student, engages them. It kind of teases them into, okay, this is pretty cool. I can try to do this. Yeah.
And then, Dave, like you mentioned, this is one that has a parameter on it to work with, where now we have the y-intercept that adds some more intrigue to what that is. But again, still working with the concept mathematically of graphing parabolas, but turning the question around to an open-ended nature in a lot of different ways. And like Dave, you said, of students may write it and report it in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
So we wanted to illustrate here, just in terms of this, of when you start with open-ended questions and finding how you're helping students and providing them with feedback or changing the question, and you think it's going well, that sometimes actually you're over scaffolding what the question is. You're not helping anything whatsoever, and then you actually need some rescue for what you're doing. So we want to say that this is a learning process. It doesn't always work well. You learn a lot, and it's a great way to dialogue with colleagues about things as you share in this journey together.
Yeah, I'm just thinking though, my family, I'm the youngest of 5 children, Mills, and my brothers and sisters always told me, grow up and get it yourself. And that's kind of been my philosophy in education, is helping our students do it themselves instead of being reliant on us. And so I think that's kind of where we're going with some of these things too.
Yeah. And so continuing on with what Willingham has said here is we're really eager to get to the answer and not develop sufficient time developing the question. And we found this is a way, in terms of working with open-ended questions, of getting ways for students to get up and do it themselves in that sense.
Yeah, and I think we rob kids of that aha moment. We love math. We're math teachers. We love it. And we kind of do the aha part and show them, instead of letting them get that aha moment and doing it themselves, and then getting that excitement of, oh, this is really cool. So
yeah,
that's what I think he's kind of telling us too.
Right. Exactly. So it's hard though, because instructional resources that we come across don't lend themselves to this type of thing. So curriculum that you have, and then trying to find other ideas or curriculum resources that, again, stick within sort of the framework of your progression of learning that you have, that you're using in your school or with your colleagues, but changing things around. So this example here of factoring quadratic, procedural, and then, you know, the resources that we have, you know, are doing good things. Like Dave, you mentioned the AHA. This one actually tells what students should notice here from that structure. So I think that's something to be cautious about, like you said, of let students, you know, we work with ways of helping students, you know, help nudge them to, or arrive at that point on their own, but we have to set up that scenario for that to happen. And so taking this concept then of factoring a quadratic and using sort of Dan Meyer's idea of if the factoring is the aspirin, what is the headache to work with? And here's an example then of the same concept. You know, pick a number and write it down. Then you ask students to evaluate the expression using your number, and then asking the student, did you arrive when you evaluated that at 0? But what's neat about this of looking at student work from an environment, from a digital standpoint, and we'll talk about, Dave, you're going to talk about one in just a second about that, is we can see if students are struggling at all in terms of working with negative numbers or positive numbers or substituting things in. But then it's lending itself to that process of them substituting values in to try to come to 0 from a guess and check method. And then providing then a structure that looks like this for students to evaluate the expression and do the same type of process, but then ask them, you know, what do you think? And then that lends itself then to them coming up with their own, constructing their own knowledge of working with these two different formats to come up with an answer. And lends itself then into why do we need, or is it necessary to do factoring? So that means also in terms of practice, we want to make sure that we do that. So yes, we do have closed-ended questions we use in practice, but it's also lending itself into questions like this is the before. And then Dave, why don't you talk about the after here?
Well, you know, I think most questions that we ask in math go down to like one answer. If we just reverse that, you know, if you go back and forth from this, here's the question usually, and find the answers. Instead, we give one answer or even none, and then we so reversing the question, it oftentimes gives us an open-ended question, which is really where we're trying to head towards.
So here's an example then, instructional resource from geometry. So taking the idea of a parallelogram and all of the properties and in some ways kind of sucking all the life out of it. Instead, going with a framework like this, sort of running this direction. So, you know, here's what do you notice about this figure and what do you wonder? But Dave, I struggle with this, especially at the beginning of the year, of notice and wonder, that I really don't get much buy-in from students. I don't get much in terms of them providing much of an answer, like it's a one-word answer or something else, or I don't know, or something else. Is there a way that you found that has been helpful for that to
Yeah, for
we can
sure.
get to that so that students pick up on this?
You know, I think culture of your class is important. And at the start, it's a little bit scary to put yourself out there. So just a couple changes in the words, and you'll notice at the next, what are at least 2 things that you notice. So it kind of just gives them a little, all right, I'm going to do a couple things. And I think this gets them thinking, and they can, it seems a little more quantifiable. I don't know. We found that to be helpful. And what 2 questions do you have about this? So, yeah.
Yeah. And then I found then that structure then eventually throughout the year, like you said, creating classroom culture where students are ready and willing and getting involved in discourse on what do you notice, what do you wonder, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then to add some intrigue here is that ways we've used this then in the classroom then is some of the questions that they ask, that's how we gauge and direct in terms of some of the instruction that we provide or questions that we ask. And then so students would ask, like, you know, are the lines parallel? Are all the sides congruent? So now we can split up the group in a digital environment where we have some students finding slopes, some students finding distance of particular segments, and then reporting back of what we come up with then as a class. And then that we explore then into the properties of a parallelogram based on the information that we have here. And then move into maybe some dynamic geometry, such as GeoGebra or Desmos geometry, to construct some of these types of things based on what students ask as a result.
Yeah, and we're talking a lot about these things, and I hope everybody's thinking in their mind, how are we going to do this digitally? And we will get to that soon.
Sure. All right.
Oh, perfect.
All right. So some of the digital ways to accomplish listening to our students, to get them involved in some discourse in that way and digital environment. So Dave, you've got 3 things here that we got: Padlet, FlipGrid, and Zoom breakout rooms.
Yep. Well, first, Padlet, I don't know, maybe you guys could say in the chat room, but Padlet has been really great for me. I've taught blended learning, blended algebra for a number of years now, and that has been just terrific, a terrific way to interact with students. It's a public posting. Let me go there. I'm going to share with you my screen. And all right, see if I can get this going.
And while Dave's doing that, we realize that the link that's there is actually incorrect. We have it corrected on the tiny URL presentation for open-ended 2020. So that's fixed there.
Right. And Scott, can you see my screen?
I can't see your screen yet. So
okay, let me just get there. How about now? Can you see it now?
Can't see it. That's loading. There we go. Okay.
So this is just a Padlet. Padlet is free, and certainly there's levels of Padlet that you can pay into. But I just ask a question. Give an equivalent expression for this, and I just put it in a couple examples. But in this case, for this one, you could just go to the Desmos example, and you could type in your possible answer, which would be x squared plus 4x minus 12, and those two are the same. You could get your graph. It's just a link there, and then you double click here, and my other answer, and just put in the link right here, or this one actually will show the graph. So I usually like the students to show their graph, but it doesn't really matter how they do it. And so I like to have all my students sign in to Padlet. This is just a great way. You can also have them like others. I like my own there, so that's easy. It's just a great way to get your students involved in what you're doing. And not only can they do that, but if you double click here, there's also other things that they can do. Look, they can upload something, they can put a link, they could do voice, screen, draw, actually. Yeah, so lots of different things. I use Padlet quite a bit. Okay, let me go see if I can stop sharing slides. Okay, we should be back, right?
All right, there we go.
Great.
So that's an example then of Padlet. And then now an example of FlipGrid. So this is, Dave, this is one that you actually worked some of, sort of from a number talk of using the 8 times 14. So can you talk about some of the ways that you use FlipGrid in the classroom in terms of getting student voice that way?
Yeah. FlipGrid is just a way for you to get students feedback video-wise, and it's also free. And if you want to go to that, I'm just going to show you a screenshot. I put this out on Twitter, and a couple teachers put in their idea for how to get 8 times 14. But your students will be able to see others' examples, how they've answered the question. I always ask my students to introduce themselves. and then to say thanks for watching at the end of my videos. But it's also class culture to get used to sharing with the rest of the class. Students really start to like doing this because it gives them a voice. There also is a way to like others and it doesn't show who likes it, it's just liking it. So sometimes I say like a few of your classmates' talks. The way I use this also in my class is I have them do screencasts, and then I have them upload the screencast, work out this visual pattern, and then I'll have them upload their screencast to the FlipGrid, and then we go through a few of the screencasts. So does that make sense, Scott?
Yeah, it does. And I like how you mentioned in terms of the screencast, some students feel a little apprehensive about showing their face and get comfortable with that over time. But a screencast is a great way to do that, where they're talking about something that's on their screen.
Yeah.
So just a shout out, Notice and Wonder to Andy Fetter and work that she's done in terms of bringing that to the forefront into the classroom. So some resources and using those in a digital environment. Just going to go over some of these kind of quickly of Open Middle, Visual Patterns, Maths Venns. I have to make sure I say that correctly. And then also Desmos with that. So this is a before in terms of an Open Middle. Solve the equation that you see here, procedural aspect. But then our friends over at Open Middle providing lots of different examples and other ones that are out there of taking and now the student creating their own question and creating their own equation. Something that Dave and I like about this particular question is from a differentiation standpoint is it allows students then who are a little quicker at solving this, are coming up with two different equations, and then other students that are taking a little longer. That's okay. They're developing one equation that they work with here. And then, Dave, what's a way that you mentioned about getting to see some of the student work where they write things down from that standpoint? What's one way of doing that digitally?
Well, one way is to actually use Google Slides. I don't know if you guys have a Google environment, but we have a Google environment. Google Slides are really, really nice for math. And there's a couple ways to use them. Here's how I got this from Alice Keeler. And you can see it's Google Slides. It's actually the same slide replicated over and over after the first couple. And you can actually pull these numbers down. And remember, it's the rule for Open Middle is that you can only use each number once. So this kind of reinforces that. This number could come down here, and this is just an equivalent fractions one. But some student could do this first one. A different student could do the next one. So you just have all your students participating, and they're just putting them in the slots, and then right here they just explain what they're talking about. So yeah, it is Google Slides. That's one way. The other way is actually to give your students this, and they copy it, and then they do 2 or 3 examples, and then they will turn that into you on their learning management system or something like that. Mm-hmm. So this is, Google Slides, I think is a kind of a hidden thing. We can put videos into the slides. I have students turning in almost like a portfolio in Google Slides of, you could have the portfolio of a class or of a chapter, and they could just do some of the problems on each slide that they're working through. Google Slides is great for math.
Mm-hmm. So again, the resource then of Open Middle goes from all different grade bands all the way up through calculus. And so that's intriguing in terms of using that type of structure. It's still there.
Yeah, and Scott, one more thing.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to Open Middle, you can just copy just cut and paste and put those into Google Slides. It's super easy. So yeah.
Great. So shout out then to Nanette Johnson and Robert Kaplinski on development of the website on openmiddle.com. Robert's actually written a book on Open Middle, which is fantastic for grades 6 through 12. So check that out. Yeah. So something that we just wanted to mention really quickly is Dave has written a book on energizing brain breaks. I've actually written a sequel to it called More Energizing Brain Breaks. But one of the things is getting your students active, which is easy to do in a face-to-face environment, not so easy to do in a digital environment. But this is one way to remind ourselves in terms of, we've had brain breaks that have been group or partner, but now we have to be with distance learning and also in the classroom with students being physically separated from each other to do individual brain breaks. So this is just an example here and something that we'll incorporate into our online teaching that we do to get students up and out of their seats for a while.
Congratulations, Scott, for publishing that book, and it's at Corwin. So More Energizing Brain Breaks.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for, and individual ones are kind of what we have to do now. Can't do the partner ones.
No. And so this is an example here of working with, two sides of your body. One is where you're winking with one eye and then snapping on the other side and then switching back and forth as quickly as possible.
Same time?
Yeah, at the same time. So, yep. And I find then that the faster that you're doing that, then you end up doing it on the same side. So great way to work with that and crossing the midline of your body. So again, something that we do takes about 1 to 2 minutes of class. But again, it's creating a classroom culture of where movement is also valued, even when we're going to be in an e-learning environment.
Yeah, and we do have these in digital format. So just give an email or something, and we'll show you how to get that.
Mm-hmm. All right, so visual patterns is something, Dave, that we really, really like. And the process here is sort of the same thing of, what does step 4 look like? What does step 10 look like? How many squares in step 43? And how many squares in step X? But how is the structure that you could use this then in an environment then of using Zoom to do that? Can you talk about that process then?
Yeah, well, Zoom Breakout, I hope you've become familiar with that. And if not, it's a good thing to look into. It's where you have, let's say you had 20 kids in your Zoom session. You could split your kids up into certain groups of 4 or whatever you want. And then they're in a room for whatever amount of time that you want. And then you can pull them back after that amount of time is done. You can also visit the rooms that you've created, and so kind of see what's going on into each room. So this is perfect. You have students kind of analyze as if they were a group of 4 at their desks. And so I think this has been a terrific thing to kind of reenact the group work, the collaborative group work that we like so much with visual patterns.
Now, Slad, it seems a little much, though, in terms of those 4 questions to work with the visual patterns. Is there a way that you handle that then within breakout rooms so that it doesn't become a structure that's unwieldy or something else like that?
Yes. Well, we like to just take a look at a couple questions at a time. I mean, these are entry level, and this is a low floor, high ceiling question. We love those. Just invites you to come into the problem. Step 4 is not that bad difficulty wise. So a lot of students can do this multiple ways, but in your breakout sessions, then you're not having students go straight to the hardest ones. You have them kind of step through the process and then change up the breakout rooms as well.
Mm-hmm. So then bringing students back together, talking a little bit about it. And then you said bringing in the next 2 questions in for the next breakout room that you set students to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Dave, I noticed you've made a slight change here of a typical visual patterns talks about step N. You've used step X here. Can you talk about the purpose of that?
Well, we're searching for X the whole year, right? So I've had students in my classes talk about visual patterns, and they say, finally, I understand what X means. The whole year we've been talking about X, and now I understand it. And I just think it puts in perspective. We certainly can use N, I mean, whatever letter you want, but I think X kind of relates to what we do most of the time. So I like to use X.
Great. So what's wonderful about this is the way we can recognize the brilliance of our students. And there's so many different ways that they come up with it, and the structure of the pattern that they see and break the items apart. And that's what I think is so cool in terms of really gives it that importance of equivalence and what those are. And we can actually see it from a visual perspective, and students come up with it on their own, which is just fantastic.
You know, this is getting me excited for school, because look at all the ways that those students did that, and the power that they brought to the table, and the aha moments that they found, and then they get to share that with the rest of the class. And I just think that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And so also just something Michael Fenton has a way of then extending this, of looking at what does something like step 1.5 look like, and getting students to think through that process of the in-between, and sort of all these different ways of students come up with it, and also providing an explanation for what they see of something of structure that's there.
That's cool.
Just one thing in terms of working with Zoom breakout rooms, as you move throughout the classroom year and things like that, using this in a face-to-face, but also in a digital environment, of providing some roles of, you know, here I talk about the different roles that students have, so they're clear on them. And so then when they're in that structure and are provided with them something to interact with, their dialogue has some more focus in terms of what students are doing, what their roles are and their responsibilities are, and then what they bring back when we come back together as a group that way. But again, it's a process. This is not something that I would start like what Dave had on the first time of doing a Zoom breakout. This is something that I use over time and introduce to them for students to use.
Well, you know, it kind of reminds me of our PLC. We have certain roles in our PLCs, and I don't know how you all are doing your PLCs, or if you have PLCs, but it's nice to have some structure. And so I think this puts some of the maybe introverts a little bit more at ease.
Yeah. So again, from a before aspect of visual patterns, of where students are substituting something into an expression, not that this doesn't have value, but then looking at it from an after perspective of students create different structures of how they come up with this answer, of what they see visually, or they may create a table or work with a graph or something else like that. And that's where the open-ended nature comes in from that structure of developing what that expression is. So a big shout out to Fawn Nguyen and visualpatterns.org and all the things that Fawn offers to the mathematical community. We really want to thank her for all that she does. So a couple other ways to accomplish listening to our students. One is formative, and the other one is Desmos Activity Builder. And then we'll wrap things up then with some questions then for people after that. So that structure, Maths Venns, this is actually from the UK, so this is not a misprint or a mistype. They shorten mathematics down to maths. So shout out to my mom, who's British. So here what you can see is a Venn diagram. Each circle then has a particular restriction on it. And then students then enter numbers into the different areas. And again, from a face-to-face environment, I can make a copy of this or display this and students write this down on paper, which is fantastic. I can do that in a digital environment, and then students could share out that way. But a way that we have found is Go Formative. And Go Formative has two options of a free version and a premium version. I'm just going to talk about an example if I took this Maths Venns into a free version of Go Formative to work with that. And so I signed up and made an account. It doesn't cost anything. I made a new formative, entitled it From Coordinates in All Quadrants, which is an example from the website. And then what I did is I used a show your work problem, which is part of the free ones that are there. And then I wrote the prompt there, create ordered pairs X, comma, Y that fit within each region on the Venn diagram. And then I entered in and made a clip of that image of the Venn diagram and then popped it in here. So this is what the student sees. And the student can use then the digital pen to write things in, or they can type text in if they want to. So again, I can now see what reasoning of students are, see what their thought process is. Slows me down to look at each student's response that way. We can celebrate what students know and then what their arguments and ideas that they come up with as a result. You can also zoom in and zoom out with this then too. So we've used this formative structure then in terms of short formatives that we use over and over again with our students then to slow down and find out what the work that they have. So there's an example there. I'm not going to go into it, but it's a pretty quick structure to set up for your students to get in to use. So there's a link there in terms of you can go to and try out this Maths Venns for yourself.
Yeah, and I think there's two things happening here. I think Math Venns is a good idea, but I think Go Formative we're also kind of highlighting. Go Formative has been terrific for me. I've given written feedback on their digital work, and it goes back to them. And I think that has been super valuable. You can also do voice feedback. Now, I think there's paid version and not paid version. Yeah. I'm not exactly sure where the line is drawn, but the written feedback, I can just pinpoint where they've done the problem incorrectly digitally on their work and just say, ask a question, and have them ponder that. And it's a little back and forth feedback, just kind of like you would be talking in class. So, yeah.
Great. So shout out to Craig Barton for developing this website. It has lots of different concept areas. And it's fun to look at how some of the concept areas, vocabulary is used in the UK versus the US, which is really cool.
And I do a algebra support, and I like Math Venns for that algebra support class. It just helps their thinking and pushes some of those lines a little bit further.
So another one especially is Desmos, which they have a new landing page, which now has the resources and all housed together and accessed that way. And so what we did then is just in terms of looking at quite a few activity builders that have been established there have open-ended questions in them. So this is one, again, in terms of working with parabolas, where students then create a parabola in any different format and then try it to see if it passes through the gates or not. And what's really cool about this is how many different ways that students come up with this and different representations that they use. And so here is using the snapshot tool of 4 different graphs from students and then also 4 different equations that they've come up with. And now I can pose questions based on the student work that's here and value what their thinking is and their understanding, and continue that dialogue and that process that way from a digital format. Much easier in a face-to-face format, but well worth it in terms of an open-ended question that I'm using in the classroom in different ways. And I've used this both synchronously and asynchronously then with students. And then here's one, Dave, you've used this in the classroom. This is one that you've developed. Can you talk about this one here?
Yeah, this is amazing. I think what's cool about this is the kids go straight to it's a puzzle, and they're familiar with this and they're trying all kinds of things. But it really, it's nice to have, if they want to use lines, use lines. If you want to use parabolas, you can narrow this down, but use a maze to get from one spot to another. And the idea that you can restrict a function is huge for them, all through math, of course. And so they restrict these functions to get to where they're going.
But that concept then of restricting the domain then has purpose in an example of this, which is just amazing. Like you said. And also another feature that Desmos has included to help with distance learning then too is to provide feedback. So similar to what Dave, you had mentioned in Go Formative, a similar structure in terms of, and Desmos is providing feedback to students then based on what they've got. And then giving them encouragement, recognizing where they're at, offering a question to help move them in another direction if they need it. But again, just a terrific structure that way that helps in terms of that dialogue. Dave, there's also a website then in terms of ways for students then. Is there a whiteboard type of structure that you use at all?
There is, and Matt asked a question in the chat room that I wanted to address too here. It's called AWW, and AWW app. And I don't know, maybe it's worthy of showing my screen.
Why don't we do that if we have a little bit of time?
Okay, we'll do that.
We'll do that.
But AWW, in what happens is that a student goes to AWW, shares that link with the other students that they're talking about, and then they're all working on that whiteboard screen at the same time. Mm-hmm. And they could post pictures, they could draw on it. Our Chromebooks you can draw on, so those are nice things, but it's collaborative and you can type on there. And then when you come back to the big class in the Zoom, you can have each group share out their screen from that activity. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So also on Desmos, they've just created then some whiteboards that you can drop into activities that you have with blank screens and ways that students then can write and represent things on that from their sketch tool. And you might be saying, okay, what about this? Well, actually, we've created a collection of open-ended question activity builders. And so there's 44 activities, and we're adding other ones there. So that's a link that you can go to afterward to look at. And we've arranged them kind of from a progression, from middle school mathematics all the way up through pre-calculus, calculus type thing. So shout out to Team Desmos for all the wonderful work that they do and the tools that they're developing and helping us to be connected and creative in our classrooms with our students and with each other. So really appreciate all the work that they do. So that meant, Dave, that we've done it, like we mentioned, in instruction. We've done it in practice. That means we also needed to do it in assessment. And so here's an example of something that, Dave and I and our team gives in terms of a short formative assessment to students that's open-ended. So given the graph, write an equation of a line perpendicular to the given line. Open-ended then because we don't specify which point or something else like that or which line. And so we're combining different concepts here. But then anticipating and looking at all of the work that's there. And so the slowdown of having this formative assessment, which we find has really been a game changer for us, whether it be the technology of paper and pencil or a digital environment, we're looking at the student understanding in this format. And that slows us down because we can look at every single student and find out where they're at, to dialogue with them, to provide feedback or feed forward to them in terms of what they're doing. And then the format isn't structured there of what it has to be in one way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and then we can share that. Last spring, what we did often is picked different examples that students gave, and then we went through that in a quick video, kind of highlighting some of the ways that they did it to get to the answer.
Yeah. We actually did it then also on summative assessments, which means to do that, we would take some questions off that would be closed-ended and add some open-ended questions and some explanation questions and things like that the students had. So here's one of draw and label a cylinder that has a volume of 24 pi cubic centimeters, and just all of these different ways. Also finding some ways such as here of providing some structure for composition of transformations. And in this assessment day was wonderful. We found that students came up with basically 14 different ways
so
in a
awesome.
class. Yeah. And then even going from that and going even broader, we developed an entire assessment then from a digital format where students were working with special quadrilaterals and then constructing them and then illustrating the properties that they have. And this is one that was, again, great in terms of Desmos to do this from an activity builder standpoint, because we could provide feedback to students along the way. But then this was fantastic because we found 12 different ways that students constructed isosceles trapezoids, like way beyond the realm of what I thought and what students could come up with, which was just fantastic.
Yeah, that's in Activity Builder. If you're interested, just email us or give us a Twitter direct message. We'd love to share.
Yeah. And then to sort of close things up, is we actually developed some own open source resources. So we actually wrote some digital textbooks as a group of teachers. Those are actually at the end, and we'll share those websites. Again, free. We incorporated lots of different ideas. So this is one to shout out to John Stevens on his Would You Rather Math, and to increase dialogue and other things like that of what we had in the structure of the resource that we put together. So to sort of close things up for a Q&A, thought this quote from Dan Meyer was really appropriate. If I want students to learn how to communicate mathematically, I need to ask them to communicate. We find that open-ended questions are a terrific way to do that, to invite them into the dialogue, and for us to change the perspective of what we're doing and listen to our students and what they're doing instead of concentrating on answers of what they have. And then getting involved in and excited about the knowledge that they're developing and coming up with and what their learning is about, and really seeing that and communicating that from an open-ended structure.
Yeah, and I think one of my goals this year as a teacher is to really listen to what a student is saying instead of anticipating. Just, we've heard the same questions over and over year after year. And so to really listen, how are you thinking and what do you know? And then kind of pause and then answer appropriately. Because I think then you're giving them a voice. You're affirming that they're there and that they're present and that they're communicating mathematically.
Yeah. So we just wanted to open things up to see if you had any questions for us to dialogue about. We've really enjoyed our time that we've had here with you, and just want to see if there's any questions for us to answer or other things to dialogue about. That'd be great.
Mm-hmm.
So Scott and Dave, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, thank you for presenting tonight. And I just have a couple questions that were in the chat. I think it was Katie earlier. I can't remember if that's the name of the person that asked the question, but there was a question of, for independent practice, do you give after or before type questions or both? For independent practice, do you give after or before type questions or both?
I tend to give both. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But I'd say the structure to make it work is just doing fewer. That less is more is something that we've really found is really important. That just a few good questions really helps in terms of manageability with what students are working with, but then also gives us that accessibility then for students to answer those questions. But yes, using a combination of both closed and open questions we use both of those.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Scott, is the amount of questions. Is it busy work or is it just, I think we really have to be intentional about what we give our students. Mm-hmm. Don't just give them to fill up 20 more minutes. Give it for a purpose.
Yeah.
Do you think the students maybe do more thinking with less questions? In other words, yes, you could give them here's 20 questions of factoring trinomials, but by giving them 5 of these more modified questions, I guess you feel like they put maybe more thinking into it than if they had the original 20 drill questions?
Yeah, no doubt about it. I think when you struggle, you remember. And we often, and I do this all the time, I try to take the struggle out because I want to help my students. But when we take that struggle out, they're not remembering as much. They're not getting as much out of that problem. So yeah, for sure, if the fewer problems, a little bit more challenging, a little more open-ended, they're going to remember it more.
And I think that's also, like you said, Dave, of a student struggling with something, if it's fewer problems, a sense of accomplishment that way, as opposed to, 20 of closed-ended questions and I'm struggling just on the first question and I don't know what to do. So in other words, structuring a question of really we're wanting to pay attention to where a student's at. And so I find of structuring that of we're using open-ended questions in our class. We're using open-ended questions then on formative assessments and summative assessments, so students feel it's part of the culture, what's going on. I think the other thing is just like, Dave, you had mentioned the example earlier of the ways that students solve the problem and really spending time on that is just a really important feature. So we're much more concerned on what the process is and where they're at and how that leads toward an answer, but slowing down to take notice of that is really important. And then also recognizing that and displaying that to students and giving credence to that.
Scott, is it making it stick or make it stick?
Make It Stick, the book that is, and the research that's much more up to date in terms of 2014 that's been done, and really shows, when students struggle with a problem and attempt solutions and try again, that's where the learning really occurs with them.
For sure.
Right. All right. I guess there was one other question. In terms of like the resources, you shared a lot of resources between Padlet and FlipGrid and GoFormative and app and of course Desmos. How easy has it been for your students to learn these different resources?
So I think one of the ways to introduce technology, I think is really important, is actually to get students to play on what you're using, as opposed to using it from a straight cognitive structure, but just to get to play. So for example, the first time I might be using app, it's just getting every student, to get comfortable just writing on it and trying some different things, not within a structure that's necessarily mathematical. And so that way, students get comfortable with using that particular tool and then using it in a structure then within a mathematical way of doing it, but not doing that tied together with mathematics. Same way with other things to do that. And I think it's part of its groove in terms of like what fits with you as a teacher and you feel comfortable with, and then also some of the feedback that your students provide that way. Dave, how about you?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think making the first time you use FlipGrid, I don't do any math. I just do, have them tell about something outrageous or something that they feel that they can talk about and not fail. I think so. Just getting them in Padlet the same. All these, I think it's a really good idea to just try to get them in using the technology. They are so comfortable in trying the technology that's not always the issue. The issue is just the content, if they're afraid to put out the content there. But that's what I typically do to have them enter non-math crazy questions.
Mm-hmm. So I saw a couple of questions here. One was, do you generally have students work in breakout rooms for a specific amount of time? Is first starting out with it is very short time frame to work and get them comfortable with that and a specific question to answer or introduction that they have, and then build up time over time in the breakout room is moved that way, but still keep it to a small structure that way.
Well,
yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Well, and I would even say that we need to make it very short, because if it's awkward, you've been in a group where there's no talking, or what's the purpose of being in here, and it's tough. So I would say at the beginning of the year it's 2 minutes, and I mean that's a lot. Just get them started talking, and then you can carry on the conversation in a bigger group.
There's a good question that was posted here, Dave, in terms of if you are getting students motivated to post and FlipGrid videos and try and open middles and things like that, but you're not associating points with it, how do you motivate them?
Well, without in my classroom, I tell my students, I'm going to pick one and we're all going to critique one of the videos. And so this way helps keep the bar higher and higher as the year goes on, because they know their video might get called on, and they will look at their video and look at things that need to be improved, look at things that really went well. And so we're all in. I pick at random which video it is going to be. I don't pick it, I just pick it completely random. And that's how one way I achieve that. And I don't know if there's any other ways that maybe people have.
Yeah, Dave, but when you mentioned that in terms of critique, though, you use some special ways of how that's done, though, because that could sound kind of negative in that way. What are ways or prompts that you give students in terms of what they talk about in terms of a video?
Well, I give them some things to look for: intro and outros. Were they speaking clear? And a lot of these things. At first, the first part of the year, it's not really clear to the kids what comes out well and what doesn't come out well. So I asked them, what things did you like? And the kids are quite honest. And at the kids that get critiqued, they actually like it, even if it's things that need to be improved on, because they're getting some attention. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty, I don't know if that's what you were looking for.
Well, I think it's the structure that you mentioned in terms of what are things that you liked about the video, and then what are things to improve upon. So I think in terms of the question that's done that way, I think the other structure there is just, in terms of motivation, is just a part of the classroom culture is that, I'm really telling students up front, I'm really interested on what, where you're at and what your problem solving process is. And that's what I'm really interested in. So I value that. And so being upfront with students about that and creating that culture from the beginning, and providing dialogue. So one of those is like, with Sarah Vanderwerf's name tense at the beginning, where you start this dialogue back and forth with students that way. And that's going to be more challenging in an e-learning environment. But I think it's that keeping that known and students know that you do that means that that's a part of the culture of what you've got in your classroom from that standpoint.
Well, it also is setting up that your peers can help you grow, and not just the teacher. It's not just the teacher's role. It's all of our roles to help each other grow better in this class. It's not just one to help all the others. It's all of us helping each other. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's critiques I think are important in class.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here tonight, and thank you for sharing a variety of great ideas. And I thank all the people that attended this session live tonight. And I'm even going to thank the people that will be watching this maybe a month from now. If you this video a month from now, realize that you can reach out to the presenters reach out to them on Twitter, both Scott Miller and David Slatke, with any questions you may have.
Yeah, we'd love.
Yeah, go ahead. I just didn't mean to interrupt you there.
No, it's great. We'd love to connect. I mean, Twitter has been great. These kinds of webinars, I think the conversations about teaching math, the profession, we're always changing. It's fluid. It's not like it's a moving target, and so we have to continue these discussions to get better.
Yeah,
definitely.
And Lee, we really want to thank you and the Global Math Department for the work that you're doing. To take time and energy to put this on, and find people, and so many different formats that you're finding in terms of how people can access this as teachers, then help what they're doing in their classrooms and also with their colleagues in partnership with each other. So really thank you, and kudos to you.
Yeah.
Well, there's a bunch of volunteers that work behind the scenes. And if you're listening to this either through the recording or you're here tonight and you want to get involved in the Global Math Department, just reach out to us through our Gmail account, globalmathdepartment@gmail.com, or reach out to us on Twitter, whether you want to help out with hosting like I've been doing tonight, or if you actually know somebody that would be great to present, please let us know about that person as well. We do not have a presenter for next week, but we do have Andrew Siddell presenting on the 25th. He is the one that created Estimation 180, a wonderful website that I highly recommend you use, especially if you have middle school students. So
Yeah, it's awesome.
Oh, it is.
yeah. So thank you all for being here tonight, and I hope to see many of you again in 2 weeks.
All right.
Yeah, thanks, Lee.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.